Kia ora mai tātou, e ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā karangata ngā maha, nau mai haru mai ki tēnei wānanga, e pāna ki ngā tangata whenua o te ao nei, i roto i te ao pūtai ao, e pāna ki ngā ota-ota, ngā rākau, ngā aha ake o te ao plant pathology. Ka tīmata tātou i te karakia, hei tīmatatanga i tō tātou nei hui. So welcome everyone, thank you very much for coming along to this very important roundtable. I'm going to start us off with a karakia, or a traditional chant or prayer to kind of set the space as a safe and inclusive space for all of us about this important discussion. Puritia mai rā te tika he kōrero. Puritia mai rā te pono he wānanga. Puritia mai rā te aroha he āwhina i te ngākau tangata, kia tū, kia ātea, kia mārama, hui e, tai ki e. So the translation of this karakia is allow the truth of the mind to speak freely, allow the truth of the heart to learn, allow the love of humanity to be open to the opportunities, so as to stand unencumbered and with clarity, let us be one, we have united in conscious thought. And so I picked this karakia because I thought it was very pertinent to our kōrero, our conversation today, as we are going to be opening our minds and also encouraging one another in this kaupapa. So my name is Hanareia EHAU-TAUMAUNU, he uri ahau no Aotearoa whānui, ki ngā taha e rua o te ika a Maori, no aku mātua, ke ngā taha e rua o te ika. He kaupūtai ahau ki te rangahau ahu mara kai, me bioprotection Aotearoa hoki. My name is Hanareia. I'm a postdoc scientist with plant and food research and bioprotection Aotearoa in our lovely country of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I am one of many people who have organised this roundtable today. So I'm going to pass on to our next speaker. Oh no, I'm doing it, sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. So I'm going to give an outline of what we're hoping to achieve today. But as the purpose of this roundtable is more of a beginning of this very long journey that we're all going to be a part of. So yes, the next speaker will be Dr. Robert MacDiarmid, who will give a context of what we have done at the Australasian Plant Pathology Society, which included constitutional changes to our society and also some guidelines around thinking about Indigenous rights and plant pathology. We will then have three incredible scene-setter speakers who will be coming from three different perspectives around how we do research as scientists and also regarding plant pathology as well. We will start with Mr. Alby MARSH, who is an amazing kairangahau Indigenous researcher from Aotearoa. We will then have some kaumātua, some tohunga, some experts, practitioners, knowledge holders. Oh, they are just everything to us back at home, our mātua Hori PARATA and mātua Tohe ASHBY. They will then be followed by what we consider to be an ally researcher who is actually from this continent, Dr. Danny. Danny, I didn't ask how to say your last name, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to say it, HAELEWATERS, who is going to be talking to about how, as non-Indigenous researchers, how can we take that first step. We will then open up for the round table, giving a brief kind of talk and amongst ourselves, the questions that you might have had after the speakers today, or any burning questions that you've had so far. Then we'll recap, and we're going to hopefully make a call for us to create a network, a community of people who would like to continue this journey, and then we'll also close with a karakia. Just as a note, our wonderful elders will have to leave our roundtable early, so questions can be open to them, but they may or may not be present for that. Yeah, so thank you all once again for coming to this roundtable and showing your interest, and we hope it's going to be a wonderful, productive, and engaging conversation. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Hana. So just a reminder, if you can just hold your burning questions until our elders have spoken. That will give them the best chance to be able to address your questions, and then there'll be an open question time a little bit after that. So I come from a place in New Zealand that is north of Auckland, if you know the geography at all. I come from a place where two mountains, two hills, guard a bay. So Mātaka and Rakumangamanga are my mountains. They protect the Bay of Islands, Pewhairangi. And I live where I was born, Kirikiri, in the Northland area of New Zealand. I live beside a river, the Waipapa, and that is my home. I work for Ahumarakai, Rangahau Ahumarakai, Plant and Food Research, and also the University of Auckland. I had the privilege of being the president for the Australasian Plant Pathology Society from 2019 to 2021. And during that time, we went through some processes that I'm just going to walk you through, and that's brought us to where we are today. We realized that there was a need for change, that how we were working as researchers was not in step with the culture of our country. We, on the forming of our management committee for the Australasian Plant Pathology Society, we elected an Indigenous persons representative. That was Hanareia, the amazing Hanareia. And that was a first really important step for us. That started off a discussion within the management committee about how do we work? How do we operate? Are things okay? What do we need to change, and how might we need to change those? To support those changes, we developed, and when I say we, I'm just actually pointing back to Hanareia, did the lioness's share of that work, developed guidelines and resources for plant pathologists to use, to enable, to build our capability and our knowledge around working with Indigenous samples and Indigenous people in the Indigenous culture. We also made changes to our Australasian Plant Pathology Society constitution to include a social objective of observing inclusive and ethical practices supported by 2 constitutional powers, establish inclusive and ethical guidelines, and advance cultural knowledge and competence, increase knowledge, co-production, sharing, and protections when engaging with Indigenous or First Nation peoples among our membership. Those draft changes were circulated to find out how they sat with our membership within the society. And we got some really interesting and insightful feedback. And so we changed our suggested constitutional changes into the form that you read just there. Then when we had our biennial meeting, I was able to give a president's speech that was actually co-created from our management committee. It was titled, "Let's Go Viral on Indigenous Rights," with a little nod there to my background in virology. And that gave some background as to my learnings of my journey of going from a very colonized mindset to opening up my mind and my behaviors to realize the place that I practice. At the annual general meeting, the proposed changes to the constitution were passed, and we had a record number of attendees to that AGM, and those changes passed unanimously. And now we're at the last stage, reaching out beyond our Australasian region. We don't suppose by any means that we are perfect. We are on a journey and we're still making lots of mistakes, but we thought that you might want to hear a little bit about our process and perspectives. So now I'd like to invite our first main speaker, and that's Alby MARSH, our Indigenous researcher.
Kia ora tātou, kainui te mihi ki a koutou I tāmai nei ki tautoko te kaupapa o tēnei rangi, tēnei te mihi ki a koutou. Ko wai au, ko maua o te manga, ko te awanui te moana, ko taki timu te waka, ko Ngāti rangi nui te iwi, ko piri rā kau te hapū, ko paparo o te marae, ko Alby MARSH tōku ingoa. Why do we do this? This is what connects us, not only to each other, but to the place. And in Mel's talk earlier today, she talked about Papatūānuku, and this is what connects us to Papatūānuku, our maunga, and also the moana around us. I'm talking a bit about Indigenous knowledge, and I've put this up here to demonstrate the knowledge systems.
I'm shorter than you are.
Oh, okay.
Get in there.
Get in there. Okay. So yeah, so this map is just giving a bit of a picture of the diverse nature of the Indigenous peoples, especially in the Pacific, but what connects them is that traditional knowledge. Some of what occurs in Aotearoa, New Zealand, also occurs around the Pacific. We call them tohu, and they have similar tohu right throughout the Pacific and across a lot of the Indigenous nations throughout the world. And that's their connection with nature, with the native ecosystems, and it's what keeps us close to our heritage, to our traditions as the Indigenous people of those communities. Within Māoridom, there is a holistic view on the way that we perceive our science. And our science is not the biology, it's not the entomology or the pathology, but there are elements of that incorporated in the mātaranga and the science that we promote and are part of the knowledge system that is part of the tradition that we bring into the work that we do in the native ecosystem. So at the top there you'll see ngā atua, and ngā atua are the deity that have special characterizations over domains. And we have deity for our forests, which is Tāne Mahuta, for the moana, which is Tangaroa, for the wind, which is Tāwhiri Mātia, and so on and so forth. And with those, what they've provided us is the mana as people to be able to carry out some of the work or the power, or providing us the power and the prestige to carry out the work we undertake as kaitiaki. The other thing there is a lot of the traditions that are passed on from generation to generation come in the form of pūrākau, or the instructive stories used for gaining an understanding of te ao Māori values. Whakapapa and genealogy is what creates those connections, not only to us as people, but to all of the other living elements within our world. So we are connected to the trees, to the insects, all other living beings, and that is part of the knowledge that we take forward and promote as researchers in the Western domain. So we talk about the speciality of Indigenous knowledge, but it's not a standalone science. It can be integrated with Western science, and we need to understand that some of the science must be kept separate, some of it can be integrated to improve or to give better outcomes or provide better outcomes for both sciences, the Western science and the Indigenous science. So the Western science can help us understand the biology or the behind some of the workings that tohu provide us, or the signs, or the natural science that connects us to other elements within our ecosystems. So mātaranga is for the, it is a standalone science, and that is part of the traditional science that has been passed down from generation to generation. And what we have is observational science, where we've occurred natural events that are repeated year after year. And sometimes they cannot be explained. They are natural phenomenon. And that's the part that we need to keep separate from the Western science, because Western science sometimes demands that we validate that science. And validation for us is repetition, is those events occurring year after year. Sometimes as researchers we tend to, and you've probably heard the saying, we can't see the wood for the trees. And sometimes when we're looking at diseases of plants, what we don't see is what's occurring naturally in front of us. And what we tend to do is look for these fancy solutions to some of the pests or some of the diseases that are vectoring some of our crops or some of our plants. But what we need to do is understand what happens naturally. So in native ecosystems, what we don't see is rows and rows of single species plants. We see communities of plants all working together to create that environment of health. And we sometimes have to understand why some diseases are more prevalent in areas than others. And it may be the state of the ecosystem, so the state of the soil, the state of the water, but what about the companion plants that are missing as well? And that is something that was shared with us by an earlier researcher or presentation on Saturday, when she talked about the focal plants having neighbours that provide influence not only the environment but over the soil biota as well. And that's something that we need to consider as researchers, what occurs naturally within our native ecosystems that can assist us to overcome some of these diseases. So kia ora.
Kia ora, Alby. And now we'll turn to hearing from our Maori leaders from the land. So I'd like to invite Mātua Hori PARATA and or Tohe ASHBY. I'm not sure whether you're coming as a duo or individually, but whatever you choose. Kia ora.
Ai, kia ora man tatu. Nā reira tautoko nei te karakia te mata maitoa tātou nei wānanga tēnei ahiai. Nā reira te kāna nāna nei te tīmatanga nāna nei te mutunga ngā mea katoa. So nā reira kānui te mihi kā koutou. I suppose one of the things that I want to talk about is the differences between science and mātauranga. let's just call it Western paradigm and Maori. I guess some of the things that happened to us as Maori, we'd been dumbed down as well by our colonisers. And I guess that was that feeling of disconnect. And I'm sure that for a lot of you, that you feel that disconnect yourselves. And just clinging to science may not be exactly where you need to be. I'll just give you some examples. Christianity. Christianity put Maori 6 months out of time with each other and our environment. And that's really important, that. In the name of Jesus, whoever he is. So it kind of disconnected us somewhat ourselves. And I guess the difference is how you're brought up too. If you're brought up in town, well, you're not really connected to the environment. And even that 6 months out of time, we call it maramataka. And that's your monthly, what's happening in your month during that time of the year. And your maramataka is connected to what we call matariki, which is the end of the old year and the beginning of the new year. I've been involved with, I guess, around scientists, environmental sciences and that, probably for the last 40 plus years. And that was as the environmental manager for my tribe. I needed to understand what you people think you understand. And because I think one of the most interesting things experiences that I had with science was understanding mitochondria. Mitochondria, of course, you would know is the female gene. And that's quite significant to us, because that's what Western paradigm is. It talks about man on top. In Maori, that's not necessarily the case. Nana, she's the boss. And so I guess that's what that was for us. And I guess even just understanding mitochondria, at that time the Department of Conservation was created, and because they wanted to eradicate the Pacific rat in New Zealand, I knew straight away that they didn't understand what they were on about. But to say things to us like a rat is a rat is a rat. For us in Māori, we say, harate kiore he rati kiore ke, meaning that there are significant differences between the two European rats in New Zealand, which are Norvegicus and the ship rat, and then you've got mouse, and he's a little mean little dude too. So when you compare them guys with the kiore, the Pacific rat, there's significant differences. But I guess what I'm trying to talk about here, in Māori we call it the whare tangata. And the whare tangata is the uterus. And that's where we all came from. And it doesn't matter who the father is, or who the producer is of the sperm, you will retain the whakaaro and the thinking of your mother. And I guess that's what Christianity did. Christianity put man on top. I was just talking to some of our group there a little while ago about how Western paradigm, it's just unfortunate that they used money to be the economy. What about if the economy was compassion and concern for each other and the environment that we live in? So there were many things that we had to contend with when Europeans came to our country, and those were things like ownership. To me, the only thing you own is your underpants and your toothpaste, because your toothbrush, because I don't want to use it. But what ownership was all about was about domination. Domination not only of the environment, but also of each other. It was interesting yesterday up at those Roman ruins. I think they were kind of getting it, but it didn't happen. But something happened along the way. So I was talking to my group about as well before we came here. I was talking a little bit about artificial intelligence. Do we deserve that? Do we even need it? So I think that science has done some good things, but it's probably done more bad things than good, because it does stuff for the wrong reasons, as far as I'm concerned. In Māori, we talk about the unborn mokopuna, the unborn child. That's what we're responsible for. We're responsible for the child that we're going to put into the future. So that's what myself and my colleague Tohe, we're part of the foundation members of a group called Te Aho Matua. And our responsibility is to ensure that science and mātauranga do not interfere with each other's space. Why do I say that? I say that because, to me, there's probably more chance that mātauranga can do something for science than there is for science can do something for mātauranga. I can't even think of what it can do for mātauranga. So it's about that connect. We're born from woman, and we're connected to the environment. To us, the environment was our food cupboard and our employment space. What was our employment? Our employment was looking after our food, looking after those resources that are important to us. So I guess those were some of the things that's part of New Zealand's history. Like when Europeans came to New Zealand, they had all sorts of diseases and that we got. And then they said to themselves that we were a dying race, and gave themselves the right to just take control of everything and impose their ideas and their values over the top. See, I suppose one of the interesting things for me, when I think about a lot of people from Europe, you people placed yourselves over the top of other people's stuff. When my ancestors went to Aotearoa, they didn't take their land off any other human being, that's for sure. And that's the difference. So that's what our mahi is aho matua. I'll just talk a little bit about aho. The aho is using a kete as an analogy. The aho is the plat at the bottom of the kete. And because one of the kōreros of the whare wānanga is that Papa Tuanuku and Ranginui had 71 sons. So that aho is made up of 71 strands. So that is where the commonality throughout the whole of Māoridom is in the aho of the kete. How you plat the sides of your kete is up to you. And in Māori we call that te mito o te reo. It's the way that you talk about yourselves and your environment. So that's our responsibility as taho matua, is to keep an eye on the journey that science and mātauranga will take together. The other thing too is that our we don't have all that much to love our colonising settler governments for. And of course, to me, it has a sneaky way of just stealing a little bit each time, a little bit more, and after a while you can feel that they're starting to push back at you. And that is one of what our responsibility is as aho matua, is to ensure that our government does not get control of our mātauranga. You can imagine that if the government was able to do that, they have no need to talk to us anymore, do they? So that's our responsibility as te aho matua, is just to keep an eye on things. It may even happen that the government will end up stealing it altogether. But our job is to make sure that they do it really hard. And how do we do that? For example, in a few days we're going to be talking about the Maori medicine that we are using to cure the phytophthora that is killing our kauri tree in Aotearoa. And that was by the use of whalebone and whale oil. And that's not the sum total of the medicine. The rest of the medicine is intangible value, Māori intangible values. And here's some of them. Whakapapa, or genealogy. Aroha, or compassion and concern. Manaki, support. And that's what that disconnect does. You can't even think like that when you become disconnected. But to be able to work with the environment rather than try to take control of it and tell it what to do is ridiculous. That's what I used to say to the Minister of Primary Industry back home. I said, stop trying to tell Papa Tuanuku how to suck eggs. She's been doing it longer than anybody. Just get out of the way and give her some space. I don't know whether I got much more to talk about really, but I think that I've made my statement. I've got no wishes for science to do anything for me and my mokopuna. I think we can do stuff together, but leave each other's space alone. In Aotearoa, the partnership model in Aotearoa, we call it wakahaurua. What's that? Wakahaurua is the double-hulled migration canoe. So you've got the Western paradigm in that hull, and Māori in this other hull. I even had a little bit of a taste at politics at New Zealand too. I'm not interested in it anymore because it's just getting worse. One of the worst things that can happen to a Māori going into politics in New Zealand is having to swear to king and country that you cannot represent just your people anymore. You've got to represent the New Zealander, whoever that is. And it's not only Pākehā. You've got Chinese, you've got Indians, you've got Arabs, and you've got some angry people that New Zealand have brought into, that New Zealand government have brought into the country. I don't feel very, very responsible for them. You would know that about 3 or 4 years ago, some angry Arabs went and blew up some people in a mosque in Christchurch. That was pretty scary. But I think COVID was probably a lot more scarier than that when I think about it. But those are some of the things that we're going to have to put up with. We're going to have to put up with some people that aren't exactly the people that my ancestors signed an agreement with. So they must be the New Zealander, and I really want Pākehā to say who are those other people, because they're certainly not Maori. And some of them are really angry people, and they're not angry with Maori, they're angry with Pākehā. They want to kill them. So I'm not going to say too much more anyway. I think I've stated what I wanted to say, and that is that science and mātauranga, they aren't the same person, and yet they are. Because some of our Māori scientists, not all of them are what we call matatauana ki te reo me ona tikanga, but the ones that are, they would know how to apply the mātauranga that they possess. But at the same time, what I'm saying is leave science in its space and will remain in ours. So nā reira kānui te mihi kia koutou, kia kaha tātu. Kia kaha tātu e te mutunga, te whakaorihe tō tātu nei taiao. Te whakaorihe tō tātu nei tamariki mokopuna. Nā reira tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora tātou te whāna. Ko te mea tūtahi māku mihe tū rā ki tā tātou kai whakariti a tātou tēnei rā. I just wanted to acknowledge the opening karakia, because it plays a very important part in our lives. And it's not just a karakia as a karakia. This karakia was about paving the way. It was the vibration and frequency that was sent into the universe to talk about the kaupapa that we're talking about today. So I just wanted to acknowledge the kai karakia. My mountain is Mototau, Matawea and Pauerua. It makes my connection to who am I. My rivers are Taumare and Waitangi, are the two rivers that makes up who I am. Within our genealogy, we talk about we are the last to be born of Tāne. Tāne is the guardian of the forest, and we're the last to be born of his children. And so we have a responsibility to look after what they have handed down to us. So when we talk about the ngahere, for the role that I play, I'm a rongo practitioner, I'm a healer, and when I want something, I'll go to the ngahere, to the forest, and I'll do a karakia, which gives me permission to go into his domain. And then from there, I will find the plant that I need for the healing. Again, I go through the same process to ask for permission to take. Because everything around us holds its own mauri. And so for us, it's trying our best not to play with the mauri, not to cut it up into bits and pieces. We keep that whole. So that's all the parts of who am I. Who am I? I am the taiao, and the taiao is me. I am the environment, and the environment is me. Everything we do has an impact on the environment. If the environment is unwell, we are unwell. So we have to look after each other. We have to look after each other, because as a rongo practitioner, it's knowing the plant that you need to heal and how to sustain each other from our unwellness, and we give back to the environment of what is happening. I just wanted to support Hori in his kōrero, because that also has an impact on who we are. So I haven't got much to say because I know Hori took up all my time. So ngā mihi tēnei ki a koutou, kia kaha. Be strong in the work that we do, that we have to work side by side, scientists and mātauranga Māori. But like Hori said, we walk together, but let's not trample on each other's mana. Ne? So koe tēnei tātou ma, ngā mihi nui tēnei ki a koutou katoa, no reira mauri ora ki a koutou.
So, should we ask for questions of people now, before our kaumātua leave?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so.
Okay, so our kaumātua, who have diligently spoken about a lot of things, do have to leave soon. So we would like to invite anyone who has any questions for them to ask them now. And we have a microphone over there if anyone would like it. So please just raise your hand and you're welcome to ask your questions. Where's the other microphone?
I think this question has come from the longest length possible between microphone and questioner.
Thank you. Very intimidating to speak. I hope I will be respectful. I am a scientist, particularly molecular genetics. When I sat down, I had this feeling, but I was living in a bubble. I was focused very much on the cell and my work and my family. And the word disconnect well describes that feeling that I have but couldn't verbalize. I teach students, and in our country in South Africa, many of those students come from Indigenous tribes. So many of them are first-generation university students, and I teach them plant pathology and genetics. So we're focused on the work, the theory. How do I be respectful of their heritage?
That's not an easy question. I think that, well, I spent 12 years with the Ministry for Primary Industries looking at the Cody dieback disease. And of course, it was really hard doing it with them. I've got a bit of a thing about me about rocking them up. And so I said to them, so they said to me, what is the answer, Hori? I said, hearts and minds, not money and guns. Hearts and minds. So I suppose that's my answer to your question.
Any other Pātai questions that anyone has? Oh, out the back there.
Sorry, and we've arranged for the next question to be back over there. So I'm not quite sure how to craft the question, but with respect to leaving your space independent of the science space. If we look at the way of the world right now, especially one theme of the conference has been food security.
Can you speak up, please?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, is that better? Yep, okay. So I'm trying to reconcile what you've said, excuse me, with the policies that are in place right now with respect to food security. And my interpretation of those policies is that they are inconsiderate of sustainable living. I don't believe that our current food security policies are consistent with subsistence living. They're just not. They're going to drive them to extinction. So I'm wondering how do you reconcile your view of the world with the view of the rest of the world? I don't know if that question made sense to you or not. I can try again if it didn't.
You spoke about policies. I guess a lot of the policies that are made aren't made by people who are applying hearts and minds. They're there to try and make money. They're there to try and gain some authority and those sorts of things. And if the result is irresponsible, really, it's irresponsible to the environment, it's irresponsible to human relationships. So, not very interested in those policies myself. In New Zealand, with our government, we have the Te Riti o Waitangi, or the Treaty of Waitangi, and we're insisting all the time that the government stops breaching their responsibility to the Treaty of Waitangi. And they're still doing it. So I guess what I'm saying, again, is that lots of times those policies are made not by people who are applying hearts and minds for our environment and each other and human relationships. And the outcome, at the end of the day, to those people that are applying those policies is irresponsible to the environment and human relationships.
I do want to say thank you for taking the time to come and present your perspectives. I really am respectful of that. I think that's phenomenal. As a scientist, we say that if you want the best expert, that you go to the farther ranges. Matter of fact, it's a direct relationship inverse, where the farther you go, the more smart people are. You always seek your expertise from far away. So respecting your expertise from far away, we have a tendency to not respect our native population around us in the United States as much as I feel like I could respect you. I hope you understand what I'm saying. So how do we reach out and overcome our local biases to our native population in the United States, for example, or Canada, where we have a great deal of respect for your perspective and a kind of a disregard for our local native populations?
How do we reach out?
How do you reach out? That's another interesting question. And I think it's, when we try to have relationships, we try to imagine the result of it. and we decide whether we're going to do it or not. I think that's all we can do, with each other. But like I say, if it is applied with hearts and minds, if I thought, I hardly trust a lot of people, and we shouldn't, until we know where you're coming from. But I think that that's about all we can do, is try to reach out to each other. You might get somebody like me and I'd see you and get that feeling, no, thank you very much. No speaker to English.
Wow. Tēnā rā kōrua ngā tohunga, ko hara mai ki te kōrero I runga I tēnei ātaumira, I tēnei wā. Mai a mātou ngā kaihau o tēnei wānanga, ngā mahi nunui kia kōrua, me ngā patapātai hoki. Nō reira, anō ngā mihi mō tō kōrua taenga mai ki tēnei wānanga, ki tēnei huhuinga nunui rawa atu o ngā plant pathologist. So I'm just thanking our kaumātua for coming along as they actually need to go to their next hui. I don't like paki, but we're at a conference. So if you would like to give your acknowledgement to our two elders, tohunga, experts, everything and all of above, we can give them a round of applause so that they may exit to their next meeting.
Kia ora tātou. Hoi no tēnei ki te whakawāte I a māua ko Hori I te mea ki te haere mātu he kaupapa no tā māua. Hoi no, ma te atua koutou he manaki roto tēnei hui. Ko te toru, kei te maha koutou kei kone. Nō reira mihi atu nā tēnei kia koutou. Mauri ora.
Well, you've got a tough act to follow, Danny, I must say. But we're very grateful for Danny to be here after travelling across the country to get back home and then also come here to ICPP. But he has a really interesting and unique perspective that I think many of us will relate to. And I'll let him talk about what he's going to do. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Hanareia, for the invitation, and Robin as well. So yes, I was in Panama to give a workshop, present several talks at a conference, and then lead a field expedition until 3 days ago. Got back in the day before yesterday, slept pretty much all day yesterday, and then spent today traveling again to Lyon. But thank you so much that I'm here. I'm humbled and honored to be here. So I approach this from a little bit of a different perspective. I have traveled in the global south for my research, which is why I got into the idea of helicopter research and how to prevent committing helicopter research. So I kind of want to get into what I study, how I got into studying field site in the global south, what is helicopter research and how we can prevent it. So taxonomy, I'm lots of things, but I'm mostly a taxonomist. So I name, describe and classify things. I am a mycologist, so I describe fungi. So taxonomic knowledge is far from complete. We have described 1.78 million species, but the total number of species is much, much higher, about 5 to 30 million, and that's just an estimate. Describing taxa is more important than ever. We have entered a mass extinction event as we speak, so the urgency to describe diversity is really high, because how can we protect if we don't know what is present? And so in the graph on the left, you can see declines of wildlife populations between 1970 and 2018. There are a number of IUCN red list assessments of different organismal groups. And then at the right is the results of a fungus, Batrachochytridium dendrobatidis, infecting lots of populations of amphibians. Okay, so as I said, I am a mycologist. These are a number of the taxa that I study. There are a number of challenges, one of them being that most of them are undescribed. So 94% are undescribed. We have described maybe 140 or 150,000 described species, but the number of undescribed ones is estimated to be in the ranges of 5 to 6 million. And so some of the reasons are that parasites are very neglected, microfungi are neglected, and there is a distributional unevenness, which leads me to studying these two groups in particular. So we have the Leosteomycetes, which on top, the black little fungus is called Aotearoamyces, a fungus that only occurs in New Zealand. And then the two bottom ones are two plant-associated genera, Cytherea and Ericife. And so as you can see on the map of the world there, most of the collections that we have studied, or most of the species and other taxa that we know, are just known from mostly temperate Europe and North America. And so there is this huge bias in distribution. The same thing with this other group that I studied, the Lapalbiniomycetes. Again, this map of the world shows that some of these hyper-diverse hotspots in the world are actually undersampled for this group of fungi. And so we received funding from different sources to do fieldwork in understudied habitats and areas of the world, including places in the African continent, Central America, and Southeast Asia. And so this is what has led me to doing all these travels in the global south. And so who is familiar with the concept helicopter research? Okay, quite a few, good. So that concept is the practice of global northern researchers making round trips to the global south, collecting materials, processing, analyzing, publishing results with little to no involvement from local collaborators. And so the question is, what can we do to prevent committing helicopter research? And I put this photo here. We should not close our eyes in the first place. But so through the years that I started traveling, which was 2015, my first travel was in 2015 is what I want to say. I've had discussions with several people who think about this subject, read numbers of papers, and try to get to a number of suggestions, which we ended up publishing in a paper a few years ago, in which we proposed 10 rules or suggestions, is maybe more appropriate, not to commit helicopter research. And so I'll introduce these rules here. So in the upper graph or upper bar, you can see that of all articles, 22,000+ articles were reviewed for this paper in Nature, and 73% of authors were from the global north versus only 16% from the global south. Now, if we focus on the articles with a focus on countries or regions in the global south, you see that a percentage of global southern authors increases, but it still stays very low. Even though global southern collaborators are essential for field access, data collection in many cases, permitting issues, local logistics. This ties back to the question, what is intellectual input when we're thinking about authorship? So this is one part of helicopter research. The second is to show culturally appropriate behavior. This is what some of the previous presenters talked about as well, and respect for local land and people, as well as to abide to local law. as well as to international law. We have the Nagoya Protocol these days with the ABS compliance. So that is also important to comply to. In addition, so respect, honesty, fairness, and care. Local collaborators are key figures, in my opinion, to obtain paperwork and permits, but not just that. There is way more field access, important field sites that I would never know that my collaborators find and know. In addition, there is the aim, and in some cases the requirement, to deposit specimens at local institutions, and then there are obligations imposed by Global North institutions and environmental agencies to deposit specimens, often specifically type specimens at local collections in the Global South. Okay, oops, sorry. There is the capacity building component, which involves depositing or saving DNA sequences in local sequence databases when they are available, which, for example, we are doing in Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique. Making use of local infrastructure, which we're doing in the University of Chiriquí in Panama, where we're depositing specimens that we collected in the Darien and Chiriquí in Panama, but also those that we collect in Honduras. And then there is the capacity building component, so the global southern individuals and institutions to acquire, improve, and retain skills, knowledge, equipment, and resources. And then taking it one step further, there is the co-capacity building, where there is actually an exchange of all of these things, skills, knowledge, equipment, and resources from both sides, from indigenous communities to the researcher, but also from the research to the indigenous communities. Okay, a few years ago, Toomey et al. Did a review of all the papers that were published from Madiri National Park in Bolivia, and they found that there was a strong interaction between the nationality of the authors of the paper and the diffusion or dissemination of the information of the data to international audience or to the local communities, which is striking, and which led us to suggesting that there should be an extensive effort be made to do that dissemination to local audiences. And so that includes publishing in local journals, in local languages, publishing in open access journals, and at the same time requesting that abstracts or extended abstracts in some occasions are published in local language or local languages, do outreach, get in touch with local press, make YouTube videos, write a popular science article, include funds to cover fees for publications, and include funds for broader impacts in proposals. And then one of the other things is the Leiden Manifesto, which are a number of principles to guide evaluations of researchers by peers. I'm not going to get in depth on this, but this leads us to this Research Quality Plus Index, which does not just focus on originality, relevance, integrity of research for peer review, but it also takes into consideration inclusiveness, local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and things like that. So it's like more of a inclusive, I don't think there's a better word I can use, an inclusive measure of everything that deals with with research in the evaluation of a certain proposal or researcher. So, the 10 rules: what can we do to prevent committing helicopter research? Establish win-win collaborations and equal partnerships. Equal in the sense that it doesn't just go from the researcher to the local communities or to the global southern partners, but that they're really equal. Actively reach out to initiate collaborations, and I wrote here to initiate global south collaborations, but that reaching out can again happen both ways. establish collaboration that are synergistic, abide by written and unwritten local rules, recognize and embrace difference in working culture, instill non-colonial collaborative research practices, use local infrastructure, incorporate capacity building, be ethical and fair about publications and authorship, and make your research available through local disseminations. And so for all of these different rules and suggestions, I have way more to say, but I don't have time to talk about all of them. And I'd like to end with this framework for engaged, inclusive, research progress, or process, I should say, which, my phone, something happened there. So this really ties together the indigenous communities and the researchers that work together to conceptualize a research proposal, to write down the different questions, get to methodology, decide on a research team to do the field work, to do the field work in a culturally inclusive, safe space, and then to disseminate all the results. And so all of this is based on respect, trust, co-capacity building, as I said before, and building equal and authentic relationships. And all of this then leads to increased knowledge and enduring partnerships that then will lead to, hopefully, more such projects. And again, I'm sorry for the messed up font sizes, which leads me to my acknowledgements, because I haven't thought of all of these things on my own. So the paper was published with Tina Antje Hofman from the Universidad Autónoma de Chiriquí in Panama, and Adriana Romero Olivares from the New Mexico State University. And we've had many discussions with all of the different people above. And then I thank the organizers of this roundtable to invite me here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Danny. It was pretty exciting for us to meet Danny. We've been chatting with him over the email for a little while now, but we only just met directly before this roundtable. So I'd just like to take a couple of moments to recap. You've heard some different perspectives and maybe thought about some things that are not everyday thoughts, or maybe deepened some understanding that you've really been working on. Just like to look at where we're at with internationally around Indigenous rights and plant pathology, that it's really quite variable by country. You've heard a lot about New Zealand, but Danny's brought another perspective as well. And I'll let you read through those. I'll just pick out a few aspects, but there is exploitation of Indigenous knowledge, flora, fauna, and data. These are really important aspects to think about. And we are living in a world where there's exploitive and extractive living. Perhaps we could get to a future state, and I invite you to think about this and join us. Maybe our regional societies could take leadership, perhaps also the International Society of Plant Pathology. Maybe we could coordinate activities internationally where we provide to our membership of our regional and international society resources and experiences. We're here to share, and you probably have aspects to share yourselves, where there is recognition and elevation of Indigenous knowledge, respected Indigenous peoples, native organisms, cultural sites, and relevant data. There's partnerships of Indigenous and world research, Indigenous plant pathology leaders, reductionist and holistic thinking is increased, and we live in a place that's respectful of our Papa Tuanuku, Mother Earth. There are things that have happened that are levers that are allowing change. International awareness is growing. The Nagoya protocols are really important. And I understand that in Europe, these are really becoming front of mind, and even in regulation and protocols for laboratories. Back in New Zealand, we have the treaty that Hori talked about, and a claim called Y262 about the Indigenous flora and fauna. There are statements like the Uluru Statement of the Heart. We can provide you more information about all of these. We've given an example of the constitutional change within APPS, and now today we're holding this round table. These other things are yet to come. We would really love if there was a ISPP working group where we can provide each other support, where we can provide each other resources. There may be a desire to have an Indigenous researchers group, ROPU, let's see, I'd very much like to hear what your desires are for the future and how we might get there. So I think it's time now to open the floor for questions, discussion. So please get close to the microphone. But yeah, if you'd like to ask anybody questions, please go for it.
Tēnā tātou. Ko Jamie Atiri taku ingo. My name is Jamie. I'm an aquatic ecotoxicologist, so I'm feeling a bit like a fish out of water at this conference. But I had a question, well, a couple of them. I had a statement and a question for you, Danny. So the statement is, yes, helicoptering, yeah, really interesting scenario you painted out there. We have a term in New Zealand called Harori Rangitahi, which is the one-day mushroom. So this is a criticism that's often levelled at researchers coming into communities and basically undertaking extractive processes. They're there for a day and then gone, you never see them again. So again, just like to acknowledge your explanation of that. And also I think one of the other key things is around what benefit you bring to these communities. So it's not only undertaking the right processes for entering into these communities, working with these communities and working with natural resources within those communities, but it's actually being very, really thinking hard and long about what benefit you are taking to those communities. Just the other comment I wanted to make was around if anyone here, and I think we have a Māori whakatauki or a proverbial saying which goes, he iti te mokoroa ka hinga te kahikitea. So even though it is a small grub, it fells the mighty white pine. So again, I think in terms of the issues here today, that's the mighty white pine. So I'd just like to acknowledge everyone who stayed around to really be a part of this panel. It's really important. The question I have for you, Danny, is getting to what are your views on how you put up a couple of frameworks there. From what I can tell and what I'm hearing, it seems like it's down to the individual researchers to really understand the impact of that they are creating in communities. So what's your view on how do you embed this type of thinking and these types of frameworks within university institutions, within other government science institutions? I think Robin gave some examples of what the society's trying to do, but I think that's one part to it. The other part is within these mainstream science engines, how do you change the views and the working processes? Kia ora.
That is a difficult question. A few things that I know are changing are there are the conduct of fieldwork is one of the things that is being put out there. That is, for example, signed by the University of Ghent, and so you have to comply to these, and that conduct also includes not committing helicopter research. So there is that. In addition, in terms of publications, for example, more journals are putting in their editorial policies that when a group of researchers, or sorry, a group of authors publishes an article using data from Global South, that there needs to be collaborators or co-authors from the Global South in the authorship list. So otherwise it can be a desk rejection immediately. And I know, at least from, I searched for a long time, and I found one grant agency that actually has the same policy. So if you want to do research in the Global South, it's actually the Dutch governmental funding agency. If you want to do research in the Global South, you have to submit a pre-proposal with a Global Southern collaborator, pointing out the broader impacts before you even submit the research proposal itself. So you have to point out what you're going to do in terms of how you're going to reach the local communities, how are you going to involve students, organize workshops, these types of things. And only when that is accepted, you can actually submit your research proposal. So I hope these are a few thoughts that I have.
Just adding a little extra to there, as well as some of the plant pathology, the regional plant pathology societies actually run their own journals. So we have autonomy, no, that's not the right word. We have the ability to change how we run that journal and the policies by which the manuscripts have to abide. So that is actually in the power if we choose to take that action.
The journals that are moving that way are not taxonomy journals. But I mean, the more researchers that become more inclusive, the more editorial boards will be with such researchers, the more we can start implementing those changes, is my vision on that. So hopefully, yes. Because yes, I do see on a number of social media every now and then all kinds of species described from Indonesia or Sri Lanka or other places, and there is like no involvement of any person from those countries, even though it's actually a Nagoya requirement to have people on the paper to describe species, and still it's not being done. So that's interesting, in my opinion.
So I'm just wondering about kind of resourcing, I suppose. So this is to Danny. So you spoke about that Dutch that you have to put in a pre. So does the Dutch funding bodies, do they fund, like, do they resource the local people to be involved and to be involved at all stages that they want to be involved at? So not just when you're there, but like the whole participation, and is that a kind of equal and fair and equitable model, or do they just, is there an expectation that they're just going to do it?
That's a good question, and I should actually look that up more in detail because I don't know the answer. I think it mostly relates to fieldwork, so when researchers from the Netherlands are actually there, it could be more all-inclusive, but I don't know the answer. I will look that up though.
You've got some extremes of questions, one from the very front and one from the very back.
And one from the side.
And one from the side, and not the side you're on. So yeah, thanks for getting the steps up for this guy with the mic.
Kia ora. Just a comment around, I guess a bit of a backfill to my previous question, and it's really looking at what are the key drivers that really influence research, and researchers in particular. And I think if I could just use the example in New Zealand at the moment, there's a RSNI, so Research, Science and Innovation System reset undertaking in New Zealand at the moment. And one of the interesting things is that this is the government organisation or the arm of government that actually provides most of the research funding in our country. So they're starting to change around the expectations of researchers in terms of who are applying to these government funding, to these government funds. And so I'm suggesting that's a really critical lever point. If you've got access to policy, that's a really powerful mechanism to activate change. Really pleased to hear about the other one is actually publications, so journals. Another really powerful mechanism to require researchers to change their operational procedures. So again, if you can identify some of these really influential levers, and if you've got ways and mechanisms into those, I suggest that would be a really a quick way as well. I mean, we're seeing in New Zealand researcher practice change overnight when you talk about funds and say, well, if you don't behave in this particular way, you won't get the funding. So again, very powerful in changing people's approaches. And just one more thing, if you're looking at really good texts to read, Linda Tuahiwi-Smith's book on decolonising methodologies is an amazing text. And again, for those, if you're interested, I would highly recommend reading that.
Kia ora, Jamie. And we will be putting up shortly, or if the projector person wants to put it up now, a call to create a community. And if it was that you signed up to this, we would endeavour to get to you those resources that have been spoken about today.
Thank you. So looking at the science, what often happens is that it tends to split up different fields into different sectors, like medicine splits a human body into organs, and then doctors look into their separate areas, and this happens also in other fields. But what we often observe is that when we separate this and then we test it, the result is not really the real world, right? So, and this is what Western science does. And my question is, how far are we with informing the public that the Western science is not the only science out there, that there are traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, that actually look into the holistic ways of working, how things work, and if there are any initiatives that actually try to raise awareness among kids already, because this is, I think, that should start at primary school, maybe high school, looking back into history classes, biology classes, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, the question is open to anybody. But how far are we actually into trying to rebuke this myth of that the Western science is the only correct science that we should aim for, and how can we improve that people know about that, and starting from primary schools?
While you've got some thinking time, could we just, could the projector person please put up the slide that's on my screen? And that has the QR code if anybody would like to join a community of interest. Did I buy you enough time, Danny and Alby? Were you going to respond?
So just to make sure I got the question right, you were asking about knowing about traditional science and what they can contribute?
And how far the public knows that. Yes, and because often I feel that people just do not know about that there is other knowledge than Western knowledge. So how far are we in informing the public that this is not the only science or the only knowledge we have?
Well, where do you start? I suppose it comes back to what you're hoping to achieve with the science that you're undertaking, and whether that has an impact for the Indigenous communities or not. And if there is an impact for them, then you need to be talking to them at a very early stage. But if you don't know about it, then the only other way you could involve yourself in that type of science is to talk to people that have undertaken that type of research. And it may be colleagues that have partnerships with Indigenous communities that have worked in that space previously. So that may be one way of introducing yourself to it. Other than that, if you don't know about anything, it's hard to sort of be introduced to it. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, very hard to respond to, I think. Well, at a personal level, I also write popular science articles, so that's one thing I do. I also write about helicopter research, so this is my personal contribution in trying to get people up to date about traditional knowledge and inclusive research, I would say. But this is just one person. More institutional, I don't know. Definitely not in Belgium very much. When we talk about being more inclusive in research and field work at diversity committee meetings, it's mostly just one or two people talking, which is me and my other postdoc colleague. And so we're trying to write this departmental framework, and it's taking just a long time to pass. And so actually I was going to ask you how long it took to change that thinking about what you mentioned about the funding changes that were implemented. Was that a long time span when you actually had input on policy and funding bodies? Because in my opinion, or in my experience, where I am, it seems to take a long time, and there are certain instances even where we have no input at all at this point. So I know this does not answer your question. It's actually quite depressing, but yeah, this is what I can say right now.
Oh, kia ora. Maybe another answer to your question. I don't know who asked it, but generally, very, very little communication of Indigenous knowledge awareness is done within the broader community, and there's some quite big issues back home in New Zealand at the moment where we have some quite long debates around the value of Indigenous knowledge, or in this case Maori knowledge, and Western science. So some big debates are happening at home at the moment around that issue. So again, it's being debated in a public forum at that level. In terms of children, yeah, it's starting to increase. So we've got a celebration at home called Matariki, which I think one of the matua, one of our elders mentioned it today. So that's a celebration of the Pleiades star cluster, which is the signal of the new year in Aotearoa in New Zealand, as it is in many other countries. So again, we're starting to have this knowledge is starting to have a place in our society, which is really great. So again, a lot of the learnings and the teachings around Matariki are starting to become, I think there was a statistic about, I think it was 85% of New Zealanders knew what Matariki is and what it's about, which is amazing. So that's basically Māori knowledge coming through the fore. So I think it is changing, but I think there's also still a few issues to talk through in terms of Māori knowledge and science, and some of the greatest opposition we're seeing is in the science sector, saying, no, your knowledge isn't the same as ours and it's not valid for these reasons. So yeah, big debate happening at home at the moment. In terms of your question, Danny, it's been a long journey, but New Zealand is lucky because we have a number of fundamental, our constitutional founding documents, Te Tiriti o Waitangi and Te Whakaputanga, provide the framework to actually have these discussions. I know other countries don't have those, so it is a much harder oar to paddle in terms of getting those outcomes. But yeah, even with the levers we have in place, it's taken a long time, over probably around about 20 years. Some of the others might have another view. Kia ora.
Cool. I just want to chip in here because I think that was a brilliant question from up the back, and I think it was also a really good question down the front here with regards to teaching students and you know, how to appropriately do that. I suggest that as scientists, we have a space here in having research humility, in that as good scientists, we always start with a null hypothesis, which assumes that we're wrong until we convince ourselves that we're right. But that also, perhaps we need to be a bit more humble in going into these conversations with potential partners in admitting that there is a heck of a lot that we don't know. And if, like, you know, you look at all of the stuff that we've seen just in today's conference, and there's still so much more that we don't know. So we as scientists do not have all of the answers. And the closer you get to the research, the more you realise we don't have all of the answers, and we reduce things down so that we can answer one question at a time. But the more we do that, the more we're reducing, you know, our frame of reference as well. So I think that at the core of the answer to both of those questions is us having a bit of humility in our knowledge and going into these spaces with an open mind and being respectful of the fact that there are other knowledges out there that we can bring together. But I'm also now going to turn this back on my co-conveners over there in that we are out of time.
We're on.
We will have the last, we will do the last question, because I know you put your hand up, so we'll do that, and then afterwards I will close us with a karakia, and then we'll go from there.
Oh, thank you. So my question was given to me by my partner. He's not a plant pathologist, he's an ecologist, but a lot of the research questions he looks at are like foundationally underlined by his worldview as an Ojibwe Chippewa. However, when he explains this in conferences or in presentations, he's met by just a sea of blank faces, or at worst, people think that because he's using native knowledge and indigenous ways of knowing, he doesn't know how a scientific method works. And so I was wondering, and he was wondering, if you have got any strategies for introducing your native ways of knowing into science in a way that still conveys that you're a scientist, I guess.
Alby?
Hang on, here's the rugby ball. It's coming right to you.
Wow, these are real big questions, all right. Yeah, there's a lot of ignorance out there in the scientific community about the Indigenous ways and knowledges that they have. And along with that goes arrogance, thinking that their science is the only science that we should be doing. So for me, I suppose it's about trying to promote your science as being an alternative rather than being the only way. And if it's given a chance to get oxygen, so to speak, and be able to demonstrate that it is legitimate and come to, be able to produce outcomes that provide benefit not only to the science community but to the traditional or the Indigenous communities that he's working alongside.
Right. Yeah, it's very hard to be an Indigenous researcher. Like I've been taught in a Western system of science, but I've been brought up as a Maori, and I know my Maori knowledge and my Maori science. So I do understand the position that they can be put in. But the one thing that I've learned and I've always been told is to be true to yourself. And I'm all of those things, right? So I just bring all of it to the table. And if people don't want to take it, that's not on me, that's on them. They have to have that behavioral change to be more inclusive of everyone that's at conferences like this, or even just around the lab group table when you're having a meeting. So I think it's on not just us who are Indigenous and are in these spaces, but also on everyone else to take those steps as well. So I know that's not like a strategy that you might be asking for, but I think, if you look around the room, these are obviously the people that you can go to whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, and take those steps forward together. So that's my 2 cents. So yes, unfortunately, as Nari said, we've run out of time. We really appreciate all of you coming. Please feel welcome to scan the QR code if you'd like to keep in touch. We're happy to share the resources that many of us have said throughout the roundtable. We're hoping to keep this momentum going forward to the next ICPP meeting as well. We want to have more Indigenous people at this conference, being participants of this conference, and even leading this conference in the future. So please, if you'd like to take that, if don't, please come up to us. We're here throughout the whole conference, and I'm happy to continue this conversation. So I'll just quickly close us off with our final karakia so that we can wrap up this space, leave it all here, and then we can go forward together in our journey. Unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia ki te urutapu nui, kia wātea, kia māma, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua i te ara takatū. Koiara e rongo, whakairea, ake ki runga, kia tīna, tīna. Huie, tāikie. And so this is a way to close our time here in this round table, as the karakia says, is to draw on the supreme sacredness, to clear, to free the heart, the body, and the mind of mankind, the spirit of mankind. Rongo, suspend high above us, draw together, and reaffirm all of this together as well. So this ends our round table. We are very grateful and appreciative for everyone who has come along, whether they've come in over time or have left over time. And we hope that you continue these discussions in your own societies, in your own lab groups, in your own communities that you're working with, and that this is just the beginning for all of us as scientists, as researchers, as plant pathologists, to become part of the One Health, One World. Kia ora.